The economists inside Iran have projected that the economy as a result of this war will shrink in this year by 10%. So that would be 5 million more people which will be driven under the poverty line inside Iran, bringing the total number to about 45% of Iranians who now live under the poverty line as a result of not just this war, but decades of sanctions. And that is what Iran is trying to do, not just lift the US blockade, but just to somehow have these sanctions removed and get some of those frozen assets that amount to billions of dollars, somehow inject that into the economy.
Obviously, Hezbollah is an ally of Iran, but then there are also those who think that part of the motivation for Prime Minister Netanyahu expanding this conflict in the south of Lebanon is because he's aware that this emerging deal could bring a ceasefire on all fronts in the regional war, and he has vowed to dismantle and destroy Hezbollah, and if a ceasefire comes in, it could bind Israel's hands in being able to continue its attacks against Hezbollah.
OK, well, Emir, as always, thanks so much for talking us through that. Emir Nada there in Jerusalem. Donald Trump says he's lifted the US blockade on Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Writing on social media, he said that he's convening a meeting in the Situation Room to make a final decision on a deal with Iran. Well, this comes after Iran's top negotiator said that he has no trust in words or guarantees from the US, with reports suggesting Iran seeking $12 billion from frozen assets as part of an initial agreement with the US. Israeli and Lebanese representatives meet in D.C. after a week of heavy Israeli strikes. Now, we have mentioned over the last few days, dozens of people have been killed in Lebanon this week as Israel expands its offensive across the south of the country. Today, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that Israeli forces had crossed the Litani River, which had previously been seen as the northern boundary of Israel's offensive in Lebanon. He'd earlier announced an expansion of ground operations. Now, this comes as Hezbollah continued to fire drones towards northern Israel. So let's go live to Jerusalem and speak to our Middle East correspondent, Emir Nada. Emir, our colleagues at BBC Verify have been analysing footage and tracking Israeli strikes on Lebanon throughout the week. Merlin Thomas has this analysis.
Israel says it's hit Lebanon hundreds of times this week. This is despite a ceasefire. We verified videos of Israeli strikes in densely packed neighbourhoods, near a UNESCO-protected site, and near a dam. And we can see from the aftermath and the size of the craters like this just how big some of the Israeli munitions are, leaving behind destruction and devastation.
Well, we'd seen since Israel announced this expanded campaign against Hezbollah earlier this week, we'd seen clashes along the Litani River. It's a strategic river, forms a kind of natural boundary 30 kilometres north of the Israel-Lebanon border. Earlier in the week, Hezbollah had claimed to repel an advancing attack of Israeli troops around that area. Now you have the Israeli Prime Minister saying that the troops have indeed crossed this river and that they're pushing north. Until this sort of expanded campaign, you'd seen Israeli troops based below the river since the ceasefire deal came into effect last month. So this does signify their expanded ground operations.
I think the main issue with President Trump's tweet, any dispute or issues that Iran could take with it, is the sequencing. And this memorandum of understanding, as we know it, there seems to be one action done, and then in reciprocation, the other side will take another step. What President Trump seems to suggest, and the way he's framed it, is that Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz, then the U.S. will lift the blockade, whereas the tweet that a few hours before that the head of Iran's negotiating team posted said that we will not take any action unless the U.S. takes the first.
The Israeli military has issued several evacuation orders across a large part of the country, with the latest on Wednesday saying that people living in southern Lebanon should leave and move north of the Zahrani River, and said all areas south of the river are considered combat zones. That's about 15% of the entire country, from which people are being forced to move elsewhere. These are reported Israeli strikes since the 25th of May, according to the Institute for the Study of War, which has been tracking them since the start of the conflict. The Israeli military said it does not seek to damage civilian infrastructure or harm uninvolved civilians, and was targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and fighters.
Donald Trump posted optimistically on Truth Social in the last few hours, writing that he's currently meeting in the White House Situation Room to make, as he put it, a final decision. So let's just run through a few of the key points in his post. He says Iran must agree that they will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. The Hormuz Strait must be immediately open with no tolls. Then he announces that the US blockade of Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz will be lifted, writing that ships may start the process of heading home.
And there is some speculation that one of the reasons why the Israeli military is trying to push further north and push people out of the south of Lebanon is because the drones that Hezbollah are using are wired. They have a spool on them, and that cable doesn't extend much more than 30 kilometres, and so this is one method by which they can try to limit the damage and the ability for Hezbollah to fly drones into the north of Israel.
And Emir, given these strikes by Israel into southern Lebanon, is there any real recognition that there is no longer really a ceasefire?